an incredible moment. The future is here.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the opening night Q&A of EFFA presents Out of This World. It's so wonderful to have you all joining us this evening. It's an absolute pleasure that you could join us in these very strange times, and we're so happy that we could go online with this festival this year and that you could jump online and join us. Thank you so much. Hope very much that you have enjoyed our feature film tonight, Fish Love, the eco-friendly romantic comedy. And I think you also have just had the opportunity to enjoy Professor Lewis Dartnell's excellent keynote presentation on surviving the apocalypse. My name is Alanta. I'm your MC for this evening, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker. So Professor Lewis Dartnell, you would have got a bit of a feel from his presentation as to what he's all about, but I'll give you the spiel anyway. He's a research scientist, he's a presenter and an author based in London. So it's so great to have him joining us this morning. It's about 10 o'clock, I think, in London. So we'll throw to him very shortly. He has a professorship in science communication at the University of Westminster. And his research is in the fields of astrobiology and the search for microbial life on Mars, which is, as you would say, pretty out there. Now, you've learned a bit from his keynote about his book, The Knowledge, and he also has his most latest book is Origins, How the Earth Made Us, which was listed by the Sunday Times as the top history book of 2019. So without further ado, I might throw to welcome Lewis. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, it's so great. You could join us across the oceans and through time and space to be part of our event. I guess we've had such a beautiful contrast this evening of different, I guess, views of the future. We've had Fish Love, which is a sort of maybe slightly gentler picture of a world without fish, and looking at some of the sort of slow decline challenges we might see in the ecological future. And then we've had your wonderful keynote that sort of presented us with, I guess, a handy hints and tips about what we can do in the aftermath of an apocalypse. So I guess, you know, your specialty is in astrobiology and space. How did you end up turning to this topic of how to survive an apocalypse?
So actually, the first book that I wrote is on the topic of astrobiology, is on what my actual day job is. And it's called Life in the Universe, A Beginner's Guide. And after that, I wrote a illustrated children's book with Dorling Kinsley, all about how you could take a holiday in outer space with your family and where you'd want to go to, which planets and moons you'd want to see, and what souvenirs you could get there that you couldn't get anywhere else. But with like my first kind of major book, if you see what I mean, with this one, with The Knowledge, it was based purely out of curiosity. I wanted to run through that thought experiment of, if you were to wake up tomorrow and the world, as we know, the world we take for granted has just disappeared, what do any of us actually know nowadays? What have you actually got up here that is useful or practical or pragmatic that could help you, can survive and make and do things for yourself? So in a sense, the book has got nothing at all to do with the end of the world, nothing to do with an apocalypse. I thought that was a neat way of asking the question, a conceit, a premise for the book of pushing everyone back to square one and forcing you to restart. And I did toy with the idea of writing The Knowledge instead as like a time traveler's book. You've got yourself marooned in 10,000 BC, you've fallen through a time warp. What would you most want to know so you could end up being like the emperor of the new world because you knew all the right things and how to make things. So it was just out of curiosity. Like I say, it was a book that I would love to read myself, realised it didn't exist yet. So as a science writer, I sat down to do all the research and the writing to create the book.
They say that's the key, isn't it? Write the book that you want to read.
Exactly. And if other people want to read it too, that's always a bonus. And even better if a publisher wants to pay you to have written it in the first place. These are the things we can dream of.
I should say, if you're watching and you have questions for Lewis, we do have the comments function on, and we have our fantastic EFFA IT staff are looking at your comments coming in, and they'll feed them through. So please pop those questions in the chat. Don't let me have Lewis all to myself for the rest of the night, because I will gladly take that opportunity. I guess, Lewis, I mean, it's such an interesting time to be alive, and a lot of us have been offhandedly referring to the current state of affairs as the apocalypse, and sort of measuring what our experience has been against all of these images of what we saw in Terminator and all of the classic post-apocalyptic cultural reference points. When you sort of talk to people about the future, what are people the most surprised of? What do people get wrong when they're thinking about what it would look like?
Yeah, so I think you're right that the page one of the knowledge has been quite worryingly prescient, because I wrote this 4 or 5 years ago, long before the coronavirus or the pandemic, and I talk about what realistic scenarios could collapse world civilization that we would take for granted, whether that's a nuclear war, an asteroid strike, or a global pandemic. And then January 2020, February 2020 rolls around, and there is now a global pandemic spreading like wildfire from city to city. But I mean, it's important to point out that coronavirus, whilst very serious and impacting all of our lives, isn't an apocalypse level event. This isn't going to wipe out the majority of humanity and collapse civilization as we know it. It's more akin to the influenza of 1917, 1918 after the First World War. But I think this notion of the apocalypse, I think one of the reasons that the knowledge has done relatively well as a book is, in a sense, there's nothing original about it. It's a conversation that every single one of us have had, around the kitchen table with our family or in the pub with mates at the end of the day, about what would you actually do if this Walking Dead scenario popped up, or I Am Legend. We've all seen the films. What would you actually be able to do for yourself? And I guess, just importantly, who would you want to have on your post-apocalyptic survival A-team? Is it going to be Jeff, who is a carpenter, knows how to build things with his hands? Is it someone who's a nurse, or is it going to be Colin the accountant, who's works quite well in the modern economy, but doesn't have much that it would be directly relevant or applicable if you're right back to scratch? So as I said, I wanted to play around with that idea, and I think what a lot of the kind of post-apocalyptic cinema seems, as far as I can see, to split into two very different camps. There's either the disaster film, where we watch civilization unraveling and falling apart, and there's lots of explosions and catastrophe going on around us, or there's the films that are set an indeterminate period after an apocalypse, where everything is ruins and there's been rewild, and there's rainforest returning, forests returning to the cities, and Will Smith is hunting deer with a kind of hunting rifle. But nothing seemed to deal with that really interesting in-between period. Literally what happens the morning after, the night before, when everything went to pot, and then what would you do for the beginning weeks and then months and then years to not survive, but to thrive and start trying to pull yourself back up by your own bootstraps? And I don't think that really has been covered convincingly in either cinematic films or computer games or literature. But perhaps the closest thing would be something like Minecraft, where you begin this game in the middle of a blank, open, empty landscape with nothing in your pockets, but you have to explore this landscape and gather natural resources. So in the beginning of Minecraft, you walk up and you slap a tree with your bare hand until, bizarrely, the tree falls over, and you've now got some timber, and you make wooden tools, and you start quarrying to get some stone, and then you mine underground to get some iron ore, and then convert that into metal by using a forge. So I think Minecraft explores some of those back to basics and using things in combinations with each other, which I think is why Minecraft is such a powerfully addictive game to settle down into it and play.
It's going to be interesting having a generation of Minecraft players slapping trees and just so confused.
I'd love to see someone who's grown up in a Minecraft world actually try to do some of those things in the real world. Like say, just a tree until it falls over. It's not going to work.
Video games where you come back to life every time you make a mistake. So not sure the real world is as forgiving. Yes, absolutely. I often, when I meet people, when I'm getting to know people, I love the, why should I have you on my post-apocalypse A team and
justify yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be defensive with people as soon as you meet them. And I think as a comedian, I am going to be one of the first eaten. So it's good
unless you can run fast. It's the old joke about you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend.
Or just make them like you enough so they don't need you. I want to throw to some of our questions. We've got some great questions coming through from our audience. From Chris, I guess, I'm a little unclear what he's asking exactly, but thinking about the film, is there anything we can do from a biological or biodiversity perspective? I'm not 100% sure if they mean, from a survivalist perspective.
So in Fish Love, the premise of the film is the fish have disappeared. They've all died out. They've gone extinct. So there's been an environmental catastrophe in the oceanic ecosystems, rather than land ecosystems, which I think we would be most directly aware of, being land-based animals ourselves. And Fish Love is a lovely kind of quirky rom-com set in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a sort of comfortable catastrophe. But I think if that scenario were to actually happen, the world would be in very dire straits. Indeed, I can't think of a natural event that would kill off all oceanic life but have no effect on anything on the land. And because all the ecosystems and cycling of elements and resources through the Earth, through the planetary systems are all linked anyway, then what affects the ocean is going to affect the land. So if I were given a menu of apocalyptic scenarios I was going to survive and try and rebuild from, I probably wouldn't pick the Fish Love. I think great as a rom-com, not entirely realistic about how bleak and desperate everything would get if all the oceanic ecosystems have collapsed.
Absolutely. I think we see so much of the oxygen production, for example, coming from our plant life in the ocean, which is all very delicately balanced, obviously. That's
it. Most of the oxygen we breathe is from phytoplankton, is from microscopic algae and organisms in the ocean, and isn't from the rainforests. And that is a true fact.
Yes, good. Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to throw to Cora. Now, Cora says, "Hi, Lewis. Great talk. What do you think we can keep from the way we operate now, and what's important to restructure in order to survive? What can we do before it all hits the fan?"
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. And it's something I kind of wrestled with quite a lot when I was researching and planning and writing the book, writing the knowledge, about if you were to do this thought experiment for real, if you genuinely thought you were writing a quick start guide to the whole of civilization and helping some post-apocalyptic community reboot and recover, what would you leave out? Are the things that have perhaps been destructive and deleterious in our own history that perhaps you would leave out and not tell people, give them the technology or the science behind if everyone was rebooting? But I realized that just it wouldn't work, that knowledge is itself amoral. It is neither inherently good nor evil. It is the applications to which you put that understanding, you put that knowledge. So, for example, gunpowder, you can make weapons out of. You can make rifles, you can make cannons, you can use it to kill each other. But also you can use gunpowder to hunt and help feed yourself. But even more fundamentally than that, if you're trying to quarry or mine or dig out canals, you don't want to have to do that with your own back-breaking labor. You want to resort to chemical means to break apart rock. So, blasting dynamite and gunpowder. So even gunpowder is this kind of weirdly, it could swing either way. So I wrote about it in the knowledge about what the simple recipe for making your own gunpowder from scratch is, and just let society decide what it wants to do with these technologies. It's not up to me as this author of a quick start guide to dictate to you what you want your society to be afterwards. You make your own ethical decisions, you make your own moral decisions. But I also thought about, other than just science and technology, what might be useful things to have in a handbook, and whether you could accelerate the process of not just technological development, but perhaps the development of governance and systems for leadership, and whether perhaps you could give a TWE 10-step guide to booting a democracy for yourself, so people don't spend 1,000 years in despotism or anarchy. And I realized that just wouldn't work. At the end of the day, social change and social transformation happens at its own pace. It happens when you have pressure from the population that they want a different system, not because there's some book that tells them how to do it. You're edging into the realms of religion if you say do it this way, not because there's any reason behind it, but because I tell you, and I'm an old book, if you see what I mean. But I don't know, it's the knowledge is my stab, my attempt at this thought experiment. I'm sure everyone has their own ideas about what they think might be the most useful tool or the most useful knowledge, or whether you would include some aspects of psychology or economy or sociology alongside just the science and tech.
What I really like about your keynote is that you're sort of, some of the scenarios that we get presented with, as you say, is Will Smith hunting in the forest. It's starting from absolutely nothing. And the odds of that are quite unlikely. It's more that you'll have remnants and bits and pieces left from various technologies that might not quite work in the same way. For example, you may not have access to the petrol for the motor vehicles, but they're probably not going to disappear. I still love Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reflection when an alien comes to Earth and names themselves after the most popular species. It's Ford Prefect. So I love your sort of, the concept of how do you get a combustion engine going if you don't have the standardized fuel. I'm going to throw to another question. And also I love that you mentioned, I think on your website, that, we use a very thin definition of technology when technology is lots of things, and even social constructs and processes can be technologies. So yes, it's a huge question what you're talking about, like what do we protect, what do we determine necessary to carry forward, and of course the huge question that this festival is asking as well is, if we are in a situation where we build back, do we build back the same, or do we build back better and different? Which is
how could you have a reboot, or to rephrase that question for today's world, what do we need to change about the way our system is set up to make it more sustainable, less impactful upon the planet? Have a recycling economy that works much better.
Absolutely. We've got another question. Please keep sending in your questions, lovely people online. We've got another 13 minutes or so before we have to give Lewis back to the UK. And to the wet and cold day it is emerging there.
It is unsurprisingly drizzling in London at the moment.
Classic.
Classic London.
Question from Alexandra. What do you think is the number one tool that we should be utilizing today to survive long term? Great question.
So one of the tools I talk about in the book is essentially the hub, the node of a huge amount of other tools and bits of machinery and machine tools, what you put in a workshop to make things or to make other tools. And so effectively this was the linchpin to the entire industrial revolution and the building of the modern world. And that tool is a lathe. And in simple terms, a lathe is a kind of a stand where you have two uprights and you put something in between them and you spin your workpiece, and then you move a tool back and forth over it or kind of in at one end. So a lathe is the way you make a candlestick or a chair leg or the barrel of a cannon or of the cylinder for a steam engine. So it's a useful tool in itself. But what is amazing about the lathe is, in order to build another lathe, all you need is a lathe. It's a tool which is able to reproduce itself. It can make all the components needed to make another one. And even more amazing than that, you can start with a half-finished lathe and then use it to complete the components you need to finish it and improve it slightly each time as you go through an iteration. And this isn't just a thought experiment. This has been done by a guy called Dave Gendry, that I talk about in the knowledge. And he started with nothing more than a pile of sand, some clay, some charcoal as fuel, and a pile of old drinks cans, so aluminium. And he built a forge to melt the aluminium, and then he cast it into the sand to make the components for a lathe, and then used that half-finished lathe to complete it, and then used his lathe to make a milling machine and loads of other bits and pieces from a workshop. So over the course of a couple of years, he built an entire industrialized workshop, starting Minecraft style, with nothing more than some sand, some clay, and some old aluminium cans, which I think is a phenomenal example of this idea of, if you just know how, you can go right back to basics and pull yourself back up by your own bootstraps. And the lathe's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and yet still today, it's right in the hub of all of our technological capability. Something like 3D printing is starting to change that now, but it's been the lathe that's been critical for centuries.
Amazing. So maybe this Christmas, the gift that keeps on giving to all of your loved ones is the lathe. Get those lathes on order and shipped out. That's amazing. So it's everyone. I guess my assumption would have been the wheel. Everything seems to come from the wheel, but it's actually.
Oh, don't get me wrong. A wheel is also useful, and essentially a lathe is built around the basis of a wheel. There's effectively an internal wheel inside the lathe.
So you have to have that first wheel, which you can probably pick up somewhere.
I mean, like you're saying, if we play this thought experiment for real, there'll be plenty of wheels lying around, in the deserted cities. You would like to think that something like that would never be lost to history, in the way that concrete was lost to history with the fall of the Roman Empire and had to be reinvented. You think that not wheels would stick around, that someone could just copy that design, even 1,000 years later.
Excellent. Okay, great question from Bo. We've got so Bo mentions that thought experiments seem to be the central of most of the films of our program this year, such as Fish Love. And what other astrobiological and extraterrestrial thought experiments do you think are worth thinking about?
So what I'm still kicking myself over is that I didn't write the book The Martian before Andy Weir wrote the book, his book, because The Martian is effectively the perfect overlap of my research career, my job in astrobiology, and thinking about Mars and the environment there and what sort of resources are available on Mars, and this idea behind the knowledge and going right back to basics and rebooting everything from scratch. Because The Martian is basically Matt Damon as a Robinson Crusoe character, marooned, not on a desert island, but on a desert planet, and having to work out from scratch how to not die, how to provide water and food. And he plays with his own poo a little bit too much. But that book was phenomenally successful. The film was phenomenally successful. And I'm kicking myself to not just have those two neurons in my own brain speak to each other and kind of spark on his idea. But I love what Andy Weir had done with the knowledge. It's a phenomenal example of that sort of genre, of starting with a simple question and then just playing through the repercussions of what would fall out of that, as all great sci-fi does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I guess we do focus so much on Mars. If Mars was out of the picture, what would be the next extraterrestrial environment we would?
So talking about our own solar system and where we think there's the best possible chance for extraterrestrial life. And bear in mind, we're talking about hardy bacteria. We're not talking about little green men. But we think the next best habitable environment in the solar system is Europa, which is one of the icy moons orbiting Jupiter. But we know that there is a global ocean beneath the icy surface of Europa. It is a wet world, there's a water world, and so offers an environment that potentially life could have got started in and be surviving even today, whereas Mars is a freeze-dried desert on the surface. Mars is a very inhospitable, inclement place to find yourself today. So if you were to be a betting person, you might be tempted to put your money, in fact, on Europa, rather than Mars as having the best chances of us finding life with our robotic probes as we explore.
Brilliant. Okay, so money on Europa should Mars be taken for some reason out of the race. And I mean, it does reflect, we always use life, the word life. And I was giving a workshop recently on viruses, and we don't even consider viruses as alive. So we have a very narrow definition of life. And again, when we talk about life on other planets, our mind immediately goes to little green men, but that's probably not what we're...
You know what though, Alanta? If we found virus on Mars, we would still be very, very excited, because although we wouldn't classify virus as alive itself, it can only reproduce if it infects into a cell. So if you find virus on Mars, you know there must be cells there as well. It's, you know, it's an obligate parasite, as a biology nerd would call it.
That said, I would be one of the many people giving you money to leave the virus on Mars. We've got plenty here, and not particularly fond of the ones we've got at the moment. A question from Michael. We don't have too much longer. We've got less than 5 minutes, but Michael, thanks you for the talk. And as an astrobiologist who researches life forms that survive in extreme situations, do you believe surviving is worth it just for surviving's sake? See, it seemed like it was going to be a scientific question, then became a philosophical question at the end.
I mean, it is a very, very good question, and it's a question that everyone would have their own answer to, I think. And one of the more unpleasant perspectives on a lot of this post-apocalyptic literature and films, where people have imagined what this scenario might be like, does involve a lot of suicide. If you've lost all of your friends and all of your family and all of your support network, and you don't see the future improving in the near term, you would ask yourself, what is the reason to go on? What would you live for? But on the other hand, I think what we find time and time again in the aftermath of disasters or plane crashes, where people are living in utterly bleak, potentially hopeless situations, that there is that fire of the human spirits. People do press on, they do continue, they do strive to survive, and importantly, to help each other out as well. We see some of the most compassionate acts of humanity in the bleakest, most dire situations. So I think there's very good reasons to have faith, have optimism in the human spirit. And even if there were to be the worst possible case scenario with global collapse of civilization, the loss of 99% of humanity, and a small bunch of survivors trying to rebuild, there's no reason to suppose that wouldn't be possible. They wouldn't pull together as a community and help each other out and recover as a society again. That's
it, and we've seen humankind do that time and time again throughout the whole of human history, really, isn't it? It's inbuilt into our genes. We are the ones that keep on fighting for survival, irrespective. 2 questions left. Our dear friend Nathan has asked what your thoughts on Elon Musk's SpaceX is, and whether you think colonizing another planet is a worthy, virtuous project, or whether we should be focusing on the planet that we're on.
Yeah, Elon Musk is certainly an interesting person. I rode in a Tesla for the first time last week, and it was a wonderful experience. It is weird being in a totally silent, sort of computerized car. And what is amazing about Elon Musk, he's revolutionized, or at least pushed through the economics of electric vehicles, electric cars, while simultaneously utterly transforming the landscape for launch into low Earth orbit. It's the first private company that's delivered astronauts to the International Space Station. What I would be concerned about, though, is if we push through with this sort of privatized space race and start sending humans to Mars before we're ready, for being a bit too gung-ho about it, because there are some very serious safety concerns that we need to address about making sure we can send humans to Mars and they're basically not dead on arrival, to do with radiation in outer space, the problems of weightlessness, making sure the technology is utterly reliable and you don't asphyxiate when your oxygen system breaks down on the way to Mars. And also, when you get to Mars, you'll have to wait perhaps up to 2 years for the complete mission of going to Mars, landing, and then be able to come back again, because you have to wait for Earth and Mars to line up again in their orbit. So we would want to be certain that we've solved those technological problems before taking the risk of launching people. And I would hope that Elon Musk is, is well aware of those concerns and is building them into his risk models and his plans.
Brilliant. Yes. I mean, yes. We always assume with colonization that all the bits in between have been sorted, but the safety is such a huge part of it. Final question to you. If people want to learn more, what's your favorite go-to post-apocalyptic film that you think really captures?
So I'll put my final plug to the book, to the knowledge, and the website, which is the-knowledge.org, the -knowledge.org. And on the website are all of the videos you can watch that we show some short snippets from my keynote talk. But also, as I think I mentioned, there's lists of the best post-apocalyptic books to read. There's my top 5 post-apocalyptic books with things like The Beach and I Am Legend, or The Omega Man, which no, sorry, it is I Am Legend was the original book. But also the best post-apocalyptic films that you can watch. So I've thoroughly loved films and also TV series like The Walking Dead that explore the idea of the world has gone to pot. You have a community of people around you. What next? What do you do to survive and then thrive in the long term? So have an explore of those lists and recommended reading lists on the website.
Great. So everyone can jump on your website and read more about your book and the excellent demonstrations as well of the fantastic.
How about play with a gasifier stove? Make yourself a gasifier stove with your kids in the backyard.
Yeah. Not in your apartment block under a.
Have some outside space.
Lewis, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us this evening. Thank you so much for making the time in all of the craziness to join us across the seas.
Well, thank you very much for having me to the film festival. It's a wonderful series of films that you've got to enjoy and look forward to.
Brilliant. And I imagine everyone at home is now clapping and applauding you and thanking you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Before you all run away, I wanted to give you all a huge thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you for being part of our opening night online in this not quite post-apocalyptic situation that is 2020. If we really urge you, if you've enjoyed tonight, to jump online and, we've got festival passes. If you want to see more than one film, consider buying a festival pass. And we've got a very special drinks deal for the wild ones with EFFA has teamed up with the Budgie Smuggler to offer 15% off their cocktails. Just use the code EFFA15 at checkout on their website. We've got some brilliant films for the rest of the season. The Other Side of Mars, where you can see the sweeping landscapes of Mars, is a highlight of the festival. And you can see photos taken by the Curiosity rover, very relevant to tonight's discussions. We've also got The Extraterrestrial Ecologies, which is a quirky documentary film which looks at ecology, again, very on topic for tonight. And not to be missed, a very special masterclass with Liz Marshall, the director of Meet the Future, with a meet as MEAT there. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure joining you all this evening, and I hope you have an excellent evening and enjoy the rest of the festival. I've been Alanta. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.